Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be discussing the battle between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump as it will play out over the next 2 years. So, this is not a new battle. Contrary to what the many people who are calling this a psyop or a divide and conquer tactic believe, this is a battle that has been going on the right for about 2 years. Ever since Donald Trump was no longer in the White House, the idea of him being contested in 2024 has been raging. In fact, Ron DeSantis has been largely viewed as the 2024 candidate even prior to the debacle in 2020 because we assumed that the Trump legacy would pass down to someone, and we knew it would not be Mike Pence. So Ron DeSantis has emerged as the front runner. He has emerged as the rising star of the Republican Party. And there is a battle now between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. As a result, it is heating up. Again, this is not a psyop. Just because it is a fight on our side does not make it a psyop. And furthermore, this is again a battle that's been going on the right for some time. It's now getting hot because Trump is making it hot. So on a live stream that we did last week, a mighty fortified election stream, my brother made the point that Donald Trump is Saul and Ron DeSantis is David. He's made this analogy, and this analogy is stunning in how accurate it is. And in this video, we're going to elaborate on this analogy, and because it's very insightful to where things are, where things have been, and where things are going. Because the Bible is, again, very relatable when it's in some ways just describing history. Because history does not necessarily repeat itself, but it also often rhymes, it often echoes to the later generations. And this is one such instance that we hear a clear echo of what's happening in Scripture, what's happening in real life. As it relates to human nature, as it relates to history. So, Saul is Donald Trump. This has been, a comparison that's been made since the beginning of the Trump era. Trump was viewed as our movement seeking a king-like figure. And to be honest, I made this comparison myself in 2016, the idea was being that we, instead of trying to choose a candidate that best encapsulates our values, are trusting someone who has a more dictatorial approach, more autocratic approach, to be entrusted with limited government principles. Now, again, this criticism did not turn out to be valid in my opinion, because one of my biggest criticisms of Trump is the fact that Donald Trump was not dictatorial enough. He was not autocratic enough for the job of the President of the United States. This was very clear when he let his own Department of Labor sue him over an order that he gave them, and they won on the census citizenship question. He let his own department sue him over that. So there was a lot of examples of dysfunction in the Trump White House. That was just one. Obviously, the biggest one would be Anthony Fauci, would be Mike Pence's task force, would be the biggest example of poor leadership in the Trump White House, largely stemming from his delegation of responsibility to evil people. So that is the biggest criticism of Trump. Now, over the last 3 years, Ron DeSantis has emerged as a conservative superstar. He is doing things. He is taking bodies in Florida, of all places. This is a guy who almost lost his election to a meth addict homosexual. That is who Ron DeSantis nearly lost to. Now, credit where credit is due. There would not be a Ron DeSantis without a Donald Trump. The Republican Party in 2018 was actually pretty well organized in those elections because they invested heavily in the state of Florida, and that investment in the state of Florida paid off in both winning the governor race, the Senate race. It also paid off in the congressional reapportionment, in which Florida was able to redraw their map to include their growth. This strategy paid off. Yet, in a purple state, in the quintessential swing state, Ron DeSantis would end up governing like he was in Texas, like he was in Idaho, like he was in a Republican plus 50 state. And this actually turned out in Ron DeSantis' favor. He became America's governor in a sense. He became the opposition governor to the Biden regency, and he became the leading voice against Branch Covidianism from a political sphere. He made Florida the symbol of freedom in a way that a state like South Dakota could not, because South Dakota is not as significant of a state. So, as a result of this body, he's also taken bodies on the transgenderism nonsense. He's also taken on Disney. He has also not pushed poison on children, whereas Trump has been a Pfizer salesman. This has many conservatives singing, Donald Trump has killed his thousands, Ron DeSantis his tens of thousands. As a result of this singing on the right, Donald Trump has increasingly become paranoid and threatened by a Ron DeSantis challenge. And this would be a primary challenge that's going to happen within the next 6 months. We are in November of 2022. Usually, the most serious candidates are announced by, Donald Trump announced, I believe, in June of 2015. So, the clock is ticking on when this is going to get really hot, but we see that the skirmish has already begun, and it's been completely unilateral. Just like David in the Old Testament, Ron DeSantis is not acknowledging the threatened nature of Saul, in the sense that he's not fighting it. Instead, he's taking more bodies. After being called Ron DeSanctimonious, which is a pathetic nickname, Ron DeSantis won Florida with 59% of the vote, give or take. That is huge. The first time around was a slim victory. This time around, after a solid record of conservative governance, running on the issues, running on messaging and policy, he confirmed and solidified Florida as a red state for the years to come. He has also allowed Florida to be a demographical safe haven for conservatives across the country. As a Marylander, I don't know any other Marylanders that don't know somebody or themselves that have not vacationed in Florida, because over the last 3 years, Florida has been free. And it's also a state with prospects and things to do. Ron DeSantis is clearly a David-like figure And the analogy continues. As Donald Trump gets more paranoid, again, the Ron DeSanctimonious comments, this is where we're at now. The future is really dark on this issue. Now, the number one criticism of DeSantis by legitimate people on the right is that DeSantis is being backed by the establishment. Interestingly enough, the David and Saul metaphor continues to point out this very instance. Over the course of David's life, he would fall into the service, or not fall, but he would go into the service of Israel's enemies. He would go into the service of the Philistines. The Philistines, in this analogy, are the GOP establishment. However, where this analogy is flawed is that Donald Trump is establishment. You cannot justify a Kevin McCarthy endorsement that Donald Trump just gave for Speaker of the House and say that Donald Trump is not completely establishment. You cannot justify the hiring of William Barr without acknowledging that that was an establishment pick. It is true that Donald Trump has had many picks that were not establishment, and these have been really good picks. But some of the picks that were uniquely Trump, like a Rex Tillerson, were also uniquely disastrous. Ron DeSantis has actually proven to be far more capable of staffing and administration. I understand that the federal government staffing of an administration and a state level staffing of an administration are different ball games, but they're the same sport. They're the same sport. And on the issue of health, Ron DeSantis has been impeccable with his staffing decisions. So, the metaphor has an ugly ending. Yes, the establishment is willing to back Ron DeSantis for now. However, I would caution against Glenn Youngkin, as this guy is a woke person who is very opportunistic. Glenn Youngkin is the person not to trust, not Ron DeSantis. We have no reason to not trust Ron DeSantis. The biggest mystery with Ron DeSantis is foreign policy, because foreign policy was Trump's best subject. It truly was. It was his best subject. We don't know Ron DeSantis' foreign policy all that well. However, we can gather that Ron DeSantis is going to fall in line with the movement that is becoming increasingly isolationist and against neoconservatism. I believe we have reason to believe that Ron DeSantis is not going to buck that trend. Now, the establishment thinks they can use Ron DeSantis, and perhaps they can to get rid of Donald Trump. But the Philistines also thought that for a time. They thought that, David was on their side for a time. But when push came to shove, he was not their champion in battle. And in the future, David did not repay the Philistine kingdoms with kindness. David expanded the kingdom of Israel. So the political calculation that the Philistines made didn't work out for them in the end. They still lost. And I don't think the GOP establishment is going to reclaim the White House. The Republican Party has gotten a taste of what a president that actually doesn't hate us feels like for the first time since Ronald Reagan. And we don't want to go back. We don't want a Nikki Haley. We don't want a Mike Pence. We don't want a Mike Pompeo. We want someone who's a champion. Unfortunately, the story of Saul does not have a happy ending. And I'm afraid that the story of Trump may not have a happy ending either. I don't want to see Trump go out like this. But the paranoia and, frankly, pathetic attacks and pot shots that Trump is making towards Ron DeSantis ultimately are leading him down a path of increasingly worse decisions, specifically on this. I don't want to see Trump go out like this. I would have no problem voting for Trump in 2024 at this time. I would have no problem voting for Ron DeSantis in 2024 at this time. But it's clear that America doesn't have the time to waste. And I believe Ron DeSantis is the better man for the job. Ron DeSantis has actually learned lessons. He's actually been the one politician who's repented of Branch Covidianism, which took courage. It's taking courage that other politicians aren't and are refusing to show, including Donald Trump. This is a major frustration that we have with Donald Trump. He's not learned his lesson on Branch Covidianism. And if he's not learned his lesson on this scam, how will he know to discern right and wrong for the next one? We don't have that much time left as a country. So, the story of Saul ends with Saul seeing a medium. And then God decreeing his demise through that medium. I don't want to see Trump go out like that. Trump has been a net positive for America, for conservatism. He's been a net positive even for the church, I would say. He has been a revealing source of clarity, as he's just revealed the people who are too effeminate to be in leadership positions. He's revealed many liberals among us. He's also championed issues like critical race theory. Our issues. And while, yes, that is a success of movements like the Evangelical Dark Web, like Voti Bakum, like, the conservatives that are fighting to save the Southern Baptist Convention specifically, he championed their issue of critical race theory. Not many other presidents would have done that. No other politicians have practically done that. But we need people who learn lessons. We need people who grow. I do believe that a Trump 2024 presidency would probably have been better than a Trump 2020 presidency, because I do believe that there are some lessons learned. But as much as a revenge arc is a great story, as much as it is a great story, we don't owe Trump his revenge arc. Politicians work for us. We don't work for them. So, that's really all I got to say about that. And I hope Trump avoids the fate of Saul politically. I would much rather see Trump play kingmaker. But quite frankly, and this is a criticism of the 2022 elections, I don't think Trump did enough. You endorse candidates, you hang them out to dry, And then when you're doing rallies for some of them, you're attacking Ron DeSantis. I don't think he helped out his own candidates enough. And that's on top of endorsing establishment candidates. So this is a critical time. And that's the message I want to, just emphasize. I think the analogy is really good. We're missing a Jonathan. But in 2024, you're going to see a lot of political activists, a lot of political insiders switch to Team Ron DeSantis because, first of all, he has $100 million at least. He has the money to pay people for a campaign. Second of all, he's going to run. He would be a fool not to run. This is your first round draft pick, your top overall spot for a, star skill position. He's got to go into the draft to see if he's going to get chosen to get the bag. That sports metaphor, I hope, resonates, because if he doesn't run in 2024, he's going to miss his window for 2028. So he'd be a fool not to run. I think even if he does run and Trump wins the primary, I think that's good for Trump as well. I think Trump needs a challenge, a serious challenge, not a Mike Pence challenge, not a Liz Cheney challenge, or a Larry Hogan challenge. He needs a real challenge to sharpen him at the very least. And one last canard that needs to be discarded is there's not a unity ticket in which Trump and DeSantis can run together. First of all, let's give credit to Trump here. Two alpha males on a ticket don't really work out together. And that's being generous to Trump. Second of all, constitutionally, I don't think that's allowed because they're from the same state now. And third of all, being governor of Florida is a more powerful position than vice president. Unless the unfortunate happens. In which case, again, Donald Trump is up there in years. Very possible. But it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to run an 80-year-old. In general. So, with that said, that's where I'm going to leave it. And I hope if you're on the other side of this debate, you listen long enough to hear me out, and you understand that I'm not some rabid never-Trumper. And I'm not some establishment hack either. I'm not a Kevin McCarthy type. So, if you like this kind of content, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And if you really like the Evangelical Dark Web, you can support our work over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. It is a Patreon-like system. We don't use Patreon because they censor. Have a blessed day, and we will catch you on the next one.